The European Union has announced the creation of a unified nuclear shield over all of Europe. Today, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that in discussions about creating their own nuclear shield, European leaders have moved from words to action. Military officials and politicians are already having concrete discussions. Merz confirmed that Germany has begun discussing the creation of a European nuclear defense system with France. This official statement was made at the opening of the Munich Security Conference, and here is what Bloomberg agency writes about it. When the United States briefly stopped sharing intelligence with Ukraine in May 2025, a new reality emerged in Europe. Washington is no longer a reliable partner, and the continent needs a plan B. Now, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, European capitals are seriously discussing how to develop their own nuclear deterrent capability. Europe depends on the United States for the so-called nuclear umbrella and the NATO Mutual Defense Pact. But if the United States can no longer be trusted, Europe could be left alone with Russia, which has the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. But now France, Germany, and Britain have moved towards creating a unified nuclear shield. And now we will discuss this topic in detail. My name is Alexei Pecher. Let's discuss this topic together. But before we start this episode, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write any comment under this video. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel Pechi News. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, on the sidelines of the Munich Security Conference Summit, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz stated that European leaders and the military have begun working on creating a unified European nuclear shield. As of today, let me remind you, this is still overseen by America. Merz stated that Germany has begun discussing with France the creation of a European nuclear defense system. Further, his quote, "I have started confidential negotiations with the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, about European nuclear deterrence. We will not allow the emergence of zones with different levels of security in Europe. Germany will abide by the commitments it made in 1990 regarding the production, possession, and control of nuclear weapons. But discussions are underway with Paris about the possibility of expanding the French nuclear umbrella to protect the countries of the European Union, including Germany. Here I should note that Emmanuel Macron has been proposing this idea for a long time. France has its own nuclear weapons. France can continue to accumulate them, increase the number of warheads, and it could take all of Europe under its protection. According to people familiar with the position of the Élysée Palace, Macron is expected to give a speech this month in which he will propose extending the French nuclear deterrence system to the rest of Europe. This will probably happen after the Munich conference, since other topics are being discussed there now. Merz, opening this conference, warned about the onset of a new era of great power politics and stated that Germany and Europe must jointly strengthen their security and independence, while also striving for partnership with other regions. To maintain the liberal order, a quote from Merz, "This order, which was imperfect even in its best times, no longer exists in its previous form." And now Bloomberg writes that when, in March 2025, the United States briefly stopped sharing intelligence information with Ukraine, the consequences were immediate. At that time, the armed forces of Ukraine, unfortunately, were forced to retreat from the Kursk region, which European allies watched with horror. And now the Europeans have already stated that Washington is no longer a reliable military partner and the continent needs a plan B. And now it becomes known that, for the first time since the end of the Cold War, European capitals are discussing how to develop their own nuclear deterrent potential so that they no longer have to fully rely on others. And Europe really does depend on the United States of America when it comes to the so-called nuclear umbrella, which consists of American weapons deployed on the continent and the NATO Mutual Defense Pact. If the United States stops being reliable, Europe will face the grim prospect of being left on its own, with aggressive wild Russia right next door, with the largest nuclear arsenal. Currently, in Europe, only the United Kingdom and France have nuclear weapons. The United Kingdom is highly dependent on supplies from the United States for its arsenal, but France can produce its own warheads. And Macron has already openly stated that he is ready to share nuclear weapons with European partners. And so, with sufficient resources, other European countries could theoretically have nuclear missiles, but that's not the case. It would require a painful choice, high costs, and violations of international treaties if countries wanted to develop their own arsenal, or making a commitment to defend an ally, which would most likely result in an attack on themselves. What do I mean? Imagine that Russia invaded Estonia. France, based on this, has the ability, if they really create a unified umbrella, to inflict significant damage on Russia with that nuclear weapon. But Russia will definitely deliver a serious retaliatory strike against France. And is Paris ready to consider such an option, when it seems like they weren't even attacked? Well, Macron assures that they are, but Europe is acting cautiously. According to sources familiar with the course of the negotiations, officials working on this issue are trying to discreetly send some signals to Russia. Macron also wants to resume negotiations with Moscow to make it clear that it is France that now holds the leading position in Europe. France is ready to defend European countries with its nuclear weapons, which means that in Moscow it is France that should be discussed regarding the future security architecture of Europe. The idea is that now it's not the United States of America making decisions in Europe, but France. And it's important to understand that such a scheme could work. Or rather, Europe seems to have no choice but to agree to Emmanuel Macron's plan. European countries today host American military facilities on their territory, including nuclear weapons. They are in close proximity to Russia and feel a direct threat from Vladimir Putin. But what if the United States just leaves one day? What happens next? Replacing American umbrella weaponry with new European models, among other issues, is an overwhelming task for most countries. The continent is already spending huge amounts on building up its conventional armed forces. In 2025, the European Union and the United Kingdom together spent more than $530 billion on defense. That's, for context, more than half of Poland's entire gross domestic product. That's why Macron is offering his nuclear weapons to his allies. He's saying you don't need to develop anything or spend billions. It's also important to remember that France and the United Kingdom have about 400 nuclear warheads. For comparison, the United States officially has 1,670. But despite having a smaller arsenal, French and British warheads have enough explosive power to destroy hundreds of cities. While Russia also has so-called tactical nuclear weapons for strikes on smaller targets, the French are only now starting to produce tactical nuclear weapons. But if you think that all of this is still just talk, that's not the case. First of all, let me remind you, France and the United Kingdom signed the Northwood Declaration last year, which states, "Our nuclear forces are independent but can be coordinated and make a significant contribution to the overall security of the alliance as well as to the peace and stability of the Euro-Atlantic region." In other words, it is clearly stated that they coordinate with each other. And right now, there is already discussion about the possibility of France deploying fighter jets capable of carrying nuclear weapons in other European countries, for example, in Poland and Germany. But there's another interesting option being proposed. It's no secret that France, as you know, reprocesses nuclear fuel. So it is being proposed that certain European countries invest in the development of their own nuclear weapons, but with one important nuance. It is assumed that France is ready to share nuclear technologies with Germany. And Germany would bring its developments to the penultimate stage of warhead production, meaning Germany would have all the components to create nuclear weapons if necessary. But for now, there is no such need. That's all. At this penultimate stage, and in a short time frame, if needed, it could produce these warheads. This is a very good deterrence mechanism. Germany seems to not have its own nuclear weapons, but if necessary, they could appear in a short time. Although some experts insist that Europeans are overreacting here, saying that when the United States talks about Europe providing its own security, they're referring to conventional defense, not nuclear weapons. Trump, they say, never mentioned nuclear umbrellas, and the United States also hasn't raised this topic in private defense discussions. That's why some experts say that Europeans should focus on conventional weapons like air defense, missile defense, drone systems, and so on, and not touch nuclear weapons. And what do you think? Write your opinion in the comments. Well, I'll leave it at that for now. Share your thoughts and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. If you found this episode interesting and informative, you can support our YouTube channel with your donation or by purchasing a paid or sponsorship subscription using the links and details in the description of this video. I will be grateful for any support from you. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.